Welcome to the Calgary Sessions. This is episode number 36. I'm your host, Jeff Humphreys. Today's guest, him and I go back to the nightclub days, which was a fun time in my life. So this will be a cool conversation because back then I had no idea about his backstory, and I've been watching him do his thing over, since we stopped working there. So this will be a cool one for me. So introduce yourself, name, and what you're up to.
I'm Paul McGrath, and I work as a photographer most of the time, and I'm also a bit of a handyman, so I'm building all sorts of stuff when I'm not taking photos. So, yeah,
cool.
Happy to be here.
The handyman thing I didn't know, but before, off camera before we sat down, because we're sitting in this iconic building. So,
yeah,
to actually say you built it.
Well, so funny, walking through here was like a total flashback because I worked at Victoria's when I was 18 years old as a bartender, got fired because I was handing out shots to the staff.
Which is a great move.
Right? You just want to uplift everybody, make sure everybody's having a good time. I had a bit of an Earl's kind of theme when I was doing that. So anyway, long story short, they're like, yeah, we can't really do that here.
Gone.
And then left for a while, and then the owner was talking to a mutual friend. He's like, hey, I'm converting part of Victoria's, and I have an idea to build a nightclub. And he's like, oh, I got a really good guy who's, he just turned 20 and super good guy, and he can give you a hand. So that's kind of how I started. Mm-hmm. So walking through here was like flashback of like knocking holes in walls and doing door frames and doing all sorts of stuff. And,
so funny.
Seeing a whole bunch of guys that we all kind of collectively know. Calgary's pretty small and intimate, so yeah.
Totally. And the cool thing, we've had a couple of the old embassy crew on here, which has been really fun. Just because that time in our life was very interesting. Calgary was a really fun place back then.
It was.
And we were working in one of the coolest spots. So the crew that came out of there is just, I'm glad you said yes to be on the show. So.
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's funny because when I kicked Victor out of this very club back then in 92. And ever since then, because I did in a way, like I was never, a guy who wanted to be violent.
Yep.
So I was like, Vic, let's go. And he walked out. And then ever since then, he wanted me to work for him. So I helped him open the embassy. But before, I was about a week or two behind the opening. Mm-hmm. And I went in and I wanted to see the guys who I'd be working with because I didn't want to go into like a Coconut Joe's mentality and guys just bar brawls all over the place. Mm-hmm. And that was such a cool crew of guys.
Yep.
Bradley, Ladder, Heavy, Tony, aka Hollywood, Towers. Mm-hmm. I remember somebody walking up and going, what do you do with him? Do you throw him at people? And I'm like, you know what? Think about Todd Towers. The guy, pound for pound, is probably one of the tougher guys out there.
No way.
Oh, yeah.
You would never...
Well, he's a farm boy, right?
Okay, right.
So he worked the ranch.
Right.
And I remember day one, put him at the front door. And he's Todd. He's like, can everybody please back up? And I was like, see ya. And I walked in the club and I came back an hour later and he's like, get back! And kind of became, a doorman at that point. And he was just he fit in with everybody because we were not like the crew that wanted to see fights. We just wanted to see people dance and have fun. And he had like Sid and Faust and like all these amazing DJs that were kicking around there, and you got guys like Dale flipping bottle caps at everybody from the bar, and it was super fun.
It was a really cool time. So the gist of the show is I like to take the guests back as far as they want to go. So how you grew up, what inspired you back then, just kind of get into your roots of kind of what led you on your path that you're on today. So this will be cool for me to hear.
I'm a happy accident. It's the weirdest thing because Dad's a doctor, my mom is an anthropologist, private school education, didn't quite fit in that mold.
Calgary?
Strathcona-Tweedsmuir, so it was out in Okotoks. Yep. Bust in every day kind of thing, and grew up in Elbow Park and really close to like the Glencoe Club and, mixing in with that group of people. Yep. And then, we're all friends. We're all going to school together, but I'll never forget my dad because Dad was so awesome. He's like, here's the keys to the 79 LTD station wagon. Don't crash it. And all my other friends are like BMW, Mercedes. Like it was, my dad's like, no.
Like wood paneling?
Like, oh, absolutely. Yeah. I loved it. And so that was kind of part of my dad's mentality, and it kind of sunk into me a little bit. So I switched from Strath and I went to Henry Wisewood for my last couple of years, and got introduced, like started working at Earlston Palace at 16 and all that kind of stuff, and then started dating a girl named Trish who was 8 years older than I was. So got introduced to a whole different group of people, obviously. And then,
What were you doing back then? Like when you were growing up, sports? Were you
All sports.
artists? What was going on?
Well, that's the funny part about it. And so that's why I say I'm this kind of happy accident, because back in school, I was the jock. They're like,
Everything?
Everything. I did cross-country running, right from that to volleyball, right from that to basketball, right from that to track and field and rugby at the same time. So, I was just like, I went from 5'3" to 6'1" in a year, and, bouncing the odd basketball off my toes and stuff like that. And just kind of like trying to figure myself out. And then I became a really good athlete. And my brothers and my dad were really good athletes too. Yep. So kind of went through that. And there was nothing artistic about Paul McGrath, like in the least.
Do you think it was also a generational thing? Like back then, do you think, being a creative person wasn't really... you couldn't look around and find some inspiration of like, that seems...
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, all we were doing is running around and getting in trouble in the neighborhood. My Andrew, my brother, and I, we were nicknamed the Elbow Park Wreckers, because every time we left the house, we'd come back, we'd have wrecked something. We'd be like,
sorry.
What, right? And mostly it was guilt through association. I was the youngest of the four, so interesting in that sense. But yeah, still nothing artistic. My mom was always a painter and always doing kind of really cool stuff.
Like in the house, or did she have a spot, or what was she?
She'd just draw. She'd be talking to you and doodling, and then she'd have this like amazing landscape or like a wolf's face or something, and you're like, wow. And as a kid, you're kind of like, oh, that's cool. And I found that, as I look back, they bought me one of those little tiny disc cameras, like that fits in your pocket. And I took a million out of focus shots, that like all really tight shots of my cat's faces and stuff like that. And looking back, I'm like, oh, maybe I did have the interest back then, but after the age of like 10, it was just sports, and that's kind of all I did. And then,
do you think when you were watching her like doodle and stuff, were you just like, mom's just messing around, or did you just something she did?
Something she did,
and that's it. That's all you thought.
Yeah, like mom is like, she says she's 5 feet, but she's 4'11", and I'll give her 5 feet. Like I'm like, okay, if you want it, you can have it. But she's this little person with just a mega amount of talent in her, and she would just so she just do stuff, and you're kind of like, oh wow, like you're too young to be proud of her in the moment, but you're just like, later on in life, you're like, wow, like you have so much hidden talent that you don't show anybody. And she's just kind of like a soft-spoken anonymous person, and I'm like, you should have a show of your stuff. And then 17 years old, I'm at the bank, the nightclub.
Like, okay.
And you're supposed to be 25 to go in there. I'm dating a girl who's 25. They assume I'm 25. And I go. And then I meet Gerard Juncker and Kelly Strait. And Gerard is 6'4" and technically probably one of the best photographers I've ever seen in my life. Super big personality, just like Kelly Strait. So Kelly is obviously the founder and owner of Mode Models. Oh. And to that point, I kind of focused all my sports channel just mainly into rugby. So I was like, I'm just going to, this is the one that I like the most and I'm good at it. So I'm just going to keep on going.
So after high school?
Yeah, I played for the Irish a little bit. Yep. And then my coach at Wisewood was Joe Massey. He was the Saints coach. So I played a game there. And then I was like, oh, what's that taste like? Oh, what's, switched gears a little bit. Yep. And then my old coach from Strathcona was part of the Irish and also kind of associated in with the national team, Chris Thompson. And he saw me at 4th Street Rose. So we're going way back into like history of Calgary there. And he's like, you should try out. And I held up my beer and I held up the cigarette and I was like, I'll get killed. I'm done. I wouldn't have the body or the toughness to take that level. So I didn't go and I didn't do that. But anyway, long story short, Kelly saw me at the bank and...
What were you doing at 25? Were you going to university or what were you up to?
At 25 years old?
Yeah.
25 years old. So I got scouted by Kelly, young, 18 years old, and then needed to take a step back. I was on everything but roller skates. I was like, this is, all I'm doing is partying. There's nothing really as far as working in the fashion world for me at that point and being a part of his agency. Took a step back, kind of got my wits about me, and then came back. And he always said, he's like, if you don't do this, you're going to regret it. So I was just applying to go into broadcasting at Mount Royal, and then hummed and hawed about it. And I was like, I'm going to give it a go. So when I was 24, I moved to Germany, and that was kind of the first real international place that I went to go work in the fashion world. So that's what I did. So I skipped post-secondary altogether. Yep.
You're just working, partying too much.
Working. Well, at that point I wasn't, because it was at 20 that I started building this place.
Oh.
Yeah, so I was young.
And where did the handyman thing randomly
That started here.
just a job? You needed a job, and
I needed a job. Just came back from LA, so I was like, okay, I need to just, reintroduce myself to Calgary as not this party crazy guy, because I had like, I mean, we're talking, I can go deep.
You had a time.
I got time. Stabbed by a stripper in 91 going into 92, New Year's Eve. Yeah. Right around the corner from here by the Republic.
That kind of chaos.
Oh, I was on, like, when I say I was on everything but roller skates, I was like on a bad path. So had to get myself locked back into like, okay, I want to see 20. I want to see 21. So did that. And then, so I got a plastering trowel and was doing all the mudding and plastering in this place and knocking holes in walls with the owner, not of the building, but of the business. Victorious, named Rudy Laboon. And then, it was just like, so he was kind of my first introduction of this is construction. And then got another job in construction. And then and at that point, kind of, okay, I'll test the waters of the fashion world and see if I can actually do it. And
based on that first interaction at the bank.
At the bank, yeah. So that was kind of what started it. And
what does he say to you? Like, how does that? Was it like?
Well, that was the funniest part.
As a cliche as like, hey man, you want to?
He's like, man, you should be a model. And I was like,
were you talking to the right guy?
Are you talking to me? Like, I'm a rugby player. Like, I don't even know what you're talking about. Had no idea of that world whatsoever. And then, the fashion world has such a stigma of being super shallow. And I kind of went through a real love-hate relationship with that world because, you meet guys like Todd Towers, who was also with the agency for a while, and Todd's family to me, and met amazing people along the way. And then, as we circle back, working at the embassy where I met you, that's when we were talking about that a little bit before. I'd be working the front door and there'd be this stupid billboard of me. And I'd be like, oh, because I know Behringer's going to have his way with it. I know all the guys are going to have their way with it. And I was doing a ton of like, everyone was like, oh, he's in the fashion world. And I'm like, all that means is I fit a lot of categories. Oh, that guy looks like he could be driving a Toyota. Well, driving a Toyota. He looks like he should be in a Mark's Work Warehouse ad. There I am. Nothing glamorous about it at all. And so then I'd have all these like clip outs of me throughout the nightclub with like the speaker, and I'm like, you guys are seriously going to get me killed in here. Nobody's going to take me seriously. Like I need
model guys walking around protecting.
Yeah, exactly. They're like, yeah, have fun with that pretty boy. And I'm like, oh, anyway. So and through that time of working in the nightclub scene here in Calgary and other construction stuff, I just take off and go to Europe or go to Asia or
to go
wherever,
work.
To go work, yeah.
So just through the agency, they would book gigs for you, and you just go.
Yeah. So Mode was my mother agency, and then they'd have back in the day it was a comp card. You'd flip a comp card over, and there's Paul and 6'2" and whatever. And then agencies would be like, yeah, I think he's a great fit. And so I'm working in, like I am the average guy next door. So I fit a lot of these categories where you see these other guys who are like striking looking, and they do these wicked huge campaigns, and they might not work as much, but they're getting paid a fortune to do it. Whereas I was kind of the worker bee, just kind of doing a little bit of work for, I did really well in Germany. Germany was like a catalog market that they're like, we like the way that guy looks, so let's have him on. And then my best market was Asia. And that was super funny. And I remember landing in Hong Kong, and I was like, I'm going to last about 2 weeks here because like my apartment was above a meat market, and there's rats everywhere. I'm completely phobic of mice and rats. I really, like, you can kick a rat away from you, but a mouse, you got no chance. It's up your pant leg, and you're like, anyway. So I based, kind of went back and forth, but I think the driving thing that always brought me back to Calgary was, one, I love Calgary, love Canada. It's just home, and funny enough, in Hong Kong, every metro station I go through, once in a while you see like an Air Canada banner, and you're like, man, we live in a great part of the world, and it's always amazing to come back to Canada. So, and my family is here, and I'm a huge family guy, so I'm like, I don't want to be one of those guys in the industry who's gone for like 10 years, and I miss my whole family's lives and all that stuff. So always came back. And lucky enough to travel with a few really, really close friends who I'm still friends with to this day in the industry. And so that was super fun. Yeah.
It's an interesting mix, like you touched on, between, traveling the world, doing fashion stuff, and then coming back here and doing finishing and walls and working in clubs. Like, did
Yeah.
it all feel normal, or did it feel like you were living two lives, or did it just like start to feel like this is who I am?
Well, it was, I never identified as a model. I was like, I'm just a guy who gets my photo taken once in a while. And
Yep.
I really was more comfortable with that, kind of never wanted to be labeled by
Yep.
any means. Cause I was like, I'm just a guy, man. I just like love people. And
Yep.
so, and I took a break from the fashion world in 1998. I was like, I'm done. I need to unplug for a while.
Yep.
And so I was like, I've always wanted to go to Africa. And I didn't have an agency there at the time. So I'm like, I'm just going to go on a safari. So I was dating a girl named Tasha at the time. And she's like, well, let's go. And I was like, oh,
we're going.
a willing participant. Okay, let's do it. So we went, and we were gone for a month. But I bought a camera, my first kind of pro camera that was just a point and shoot. And I was like, I'll just shoot my story, shoot the trip.
Where'd that idea come from? Were you messing around with cameras at all before
I
this?
hadn't even, no. I was like,
random.
Super random, but I just knew that I would regret not having a nice camera on that trip.
Because you were going to see some amazing things once in a lifetime, maybe.
Going to see some awesome stuff, and had this idea. Mom's an anthropologist, got her master's in primatology, and I'm like, I'll take some really nice photos of some monkeys and some apes or whatever.
Yep.
And then got into all kinds of trouble in Africa. So went there and, shooting my trip, and it was one of the bigger trips that I'd ever taken, without being affiliated with the fashion world. So I was kind of on my own. So we booked a safari, and then I showed a buddy of mine who was a pro photographer out of Paris at the time. And I just showed him, I was like, this is Africa. And he's looking at it and he's like, why aren't you shooting?
No way.
And I was like, well, I'm not a photographer. And he goes, you're a photographer, you just don't know it yet. And I was like, oh, no idea. And so back then, Todd Towers and I and a handful of other guys and girls were doing like all of the Stampede fashion shows. And it was, you're like, oh, okay, I'll get paid a little money and I get to go to the Stampede every day. And, and then you're like, man, why do I go every day? Like, it's a rough place to go every day.
Yeah.
Anyway, long story short, had that camera and I was just like, oh, I'll shoot some photos of the models here and there. And Kelly saw some of the images and he's like, well, where did this come from? And I'm like, I don't know, I'm just playing.
What were you shooting on? Do you remember this?
Yeah, it was a Canon Elan 2. Yeah, and it was like just 35 mil. And, this is back in the days of film, so there's no preview, there's no nothing. And I just kind of was like, I'll just try, see if I can do this.
Yep.
And then there it was. I could shoot, and I think part of it was because I had worked with a lot of other photographers, and I mentioned Gerard Juncker, and Gerard Juncker was just like this biggest personality and such an amazing photographer. And when I worked with him, I noticed he kind of made me feel great. Like, oh, so you're willing to kind of go and do a few other things for him as the photographer. And so I kind of took a few other things from other photographers. A guy named Chad Johnston way back in Calgary's day used to shoot a lot of the campaigns here. Quiet. Sometimes we'd be shooting and there'd be like hair, makeup, stylist, everything. And he and I'd be there and he'd be like, oh, let's fix your tie. And he'd look over and he'd be like, I don't want to bug them. And so he had a completely different dynamic as Gerard, but an incredible photographer. And, Colin Way, another guy I got to work with quite a bit. And he's same kind of just quiet, but super talented. So anyway, long story short, Kelly was like, I want you to test all our up and coming models. And I was like, oh, okay, sure. And then he's like, so he'd give me like 20 models to shoot in a day.
And just like typical headshots for those cards or their portfolio, whatever it is?
Kind of, yeah, but that wasn't the way I wanted to, because I'd been that guy going, I've got the exact same shot as you, and you. So I was like, I'm going to take them all on location.
Cool.
So I'd buzz around. And so I have 1 million locations around here because the agency was on 17th Ave. And so that's kind of how I nurtured that. And, Bryce Meyer would come by once in a while. And, Bryce was kind of just starting to get into photography, doing a lot of really awesome printing. And then, that was it. And then,
how did you learn technical? Was there anything technical you're picking up on sets or anything?
Oh, on sets, you're kind of.
Or you just were you aware of the surrounding you were in and what it could potentially, like how you could get educated, or were you just kind of just working?
I was working, and I was more focusing on the photographer and the art director. So I'm like, I want these guys to know that I'm here to. But I also treated it as a business. I showed up 15 minutes early. I helped hang up clothes. I was polite and I was hardworking. And so
Basic things.
yeah, basic things.
That get overlooked, right?
Well, they do. And, you know, you get a couple of people who, you know, in that industry, they think, oh, I'm a model. And you're like, easy, buddy. Like there's, you got a lineup of people to replace you. So you can't have that attitude because especially in Calgary, it's too small. So people started going, oh, he's super easygoing and works hard and he can do it, which is part of it too. And so I was just really lucky that I was busy enough here to be able to do that. So I'd go from like a photo shoot, go build something, drive to the embassy, work, and Bradley and Ladder had put like a drunk guy in my Scout, drive that person wherever he was going, and then start the whole process again. So I always kind of had a whole bunch of hustles going on. And photography was always my side hustle because I was, you know, not confident enough at the time to know the technical. I'm like, I know what I can shoot, but you get me in a studio with lights and stuff, and I would have been like a little scared boy whistling in the dark because I didn't know. And then 2007 kicks in and digital shows up.
So where are you, when you're running around shooting the models for their kind of their books and all the different locations, still film, running around?
All film.
And it's working? Like people,
it's working,
the shots are good, people are happy.
Yeah, they're like the agency's happy with the images and the models are super happy. And I think the models, because they're younger, a lot of them, and just getting into it, and sometimes I'm the first photographer they've met. And I think one of the things that comes back to me the most as a photographer is they're like, man, you made that feel way more comfortable than I thought it was going to be. And I, again, in part, it's like, well, I know what it feels like over there, so I want you to feel up. And so that whole philosophy of Gerard Juncker, he didn't even know. Gerard was just like a tornado. It would come in and the set was up and you're like, oh, this is going to be super fun. So I was like, well, that's what I want all my sets to be like. So no matter if I'm shooting corporate or I'm a wedding or I'm a model or ballet, whatever I'm shooting, my set is up. And my subjects are like, they feel up. You know, Kim Noseworthy's a really talented model who's a local girl. And I shot her for a campaign for like the Bridal Expo. And I remember her just before she left, she turned around and she goes, you really pumped my tires up. And I'm like, well, that's good. Then I did my job because this is 10% of my job. And the other 90 is this relationship.
Is it like bringing energy up, or is it like talking to them in a way that gives them confidence? Like, do you come alive on set and become a different person?
Yeah.
Like energy goes up?
Oh yeah. Like I'm
like versus screaming. This is
Paul,
chill. This
pretty
is
chilled out and calm. But if I had you in front and I'm shooting, I'd be like, whoa, like, and it's very genuine. Because I've always told people that you just need a fresh set of eyes on you because you know society does what it does, and that world is such a deep and dark world, especially for body image for girls, but also for guys. And so I was working on a series called Imperfectly Perfect, and I wanted to reintroduce people because Photoshop, filters, all this stuff, man, is it damaging. Like it doesn't do anybody any favors. So I was like, I'm going to shoot. There's going to be no Photoshop whatsoever, super duper light makeup, and I'm not going to fix anything.
This is your own kind of idea, putting together, did you want it to be a show or something, or was it just going to be displayed, or how were you going to
initially, and it's still kind of an evolving thing. I did one round, and funny enough, I got introduced, I shot a wedding in Hawaii, and same thing. Like, and if I have to lay in mud to get the angle that I want to get the shot that I think the couple deserves, the clothes don't matter. I'm in, and I'm all in, and that's just what I've always done. And that kind of helps. I think people go, wow, this guy's really committed to what's happening here, and it helps them engage a little bit more. And then, but yeah, so I shot that wedding in Hawaii, and then one of the girls ended up working in the marketing department at Alberta Ballet. And she just remembered me, and she goes, I think you'd be a really good fit for the ballet.
Were you deep into photography when this kind of happened?
Yeah, I had definitely been doing some work, and I had, I found some technical knowledge. And one of the best ways to do that is hire an assistant who knows more than you. And so I had a really good guy working with me, and he took care of that. I go, this is what we want to accomplish. And he'd go, okay, well, try this. So I leaned on him for the technical, but he was always like, I don't have what you have with talking to people and building them up. So he liked being, in that role. And I liked this role. That was what I enjoyed the most.
Did you go digital by now?
Oh, I was already digital. Okay. Yeah. 2007 came in and I went digital, but I would always shoot both because I'm like, oh man, that little card. that goes
it breaks.
haywire, it's gone. So at least film is tangible. You can feel it and know.
Yeah.
So I had a little control. And then so I kind of fought that battle and then eventually just kind of went digital.
Yep. So
full time.
Hawaii, you're full digital?
No. Yeah. Hawaii was full digital.
Yep.
And then got the call saying, hey, can you come in? And they're like, do you think you can shoot dance? And I'm like, I have no idea.
Up to that point, was it all word of mouth?
Always.
Was it tapping into different networks that you'd kind of, you got the fashion world, you got the nightclub world, you got the, is that how it all played out?
Well, and so that's kind of the beauty about it. And I think part of it was, it might change now because I'm a pretty opinionated guy, and you get older and your circle gets a little bit smaller and your values kind of, dig in deeper, and then you're responsible for a couple of little creatures that you kind of like, I want to make sure I'm giving them a good foundation. So, but back then it was, I was just like everybody's cheerleader. Just wanted everybody to feel good and wanted to just be a good guy. And so, nothing happens by mistake.
Yep.
So I'm in the nightclub industry for a reason, meeting guys like you and Tony and Todd. And then in the construction world and working with that crew of people. And I didn't treat any of those different groups of people, private school guy and, shooting all the events at Holt Renfrew and stuff.
Yep.
Nobody gets treated differently by me. So if you're a guy who's working 9 to 5, making $14 an hour, or you're a billionaire, you have my attention the same way.
Yep.
And I think people know that. And I think, even the ones that you would think would expect a little extra treatment or appreciate being treated just like anybody else.
Yep.
So they have a different background. But yeah, so that was kind of part of it. And I think that having those circles, it's started to just build, and people are like, oh, he's, I got Lee Behringer's wedding.
Is that one of the first ones?
I was not the primary shooter there, but I got invited to their wedding at the last minute, and I didn't have a gift. And I was like, oh man, well, I'll shoot a couple rolls of film. So I shot 4 rolls of film of everything they weren't watching. So it was all kind of the behind the scenes stuff. And then I gave them that, and she's like, I didn't know you shot weddings. And I'm like, well, I'm not really a wedding guy. I shoot fashion. And then a couple of the girls at the agency said, will you shoot my wedding? And I'm like, yeah, of course. It'll be my gift. Just gift you a wedding or whatever. I had no idea how that business worked or how to create a business model for it. All I knew is I loved, when I had a camera in my hands, I was a different person and more elevated and more of a cheerleader. So that's kind of what started. And then people like, and anybody could be like a guy who's worked the farm his whole life and never wanted his photo taken. And I just shake his hand and pull him in. And I'd be like, man, those hands have got a story. I don't know what it is, but I want to hear it. And they'd be like, oh, you're a good guy.
Sets the tone.
Sets the tone and lets everybody know that I don't take myself too seriously. No need to be intimidated by me just because I have a camera in my hands. But I'm going to reintroduce you to yourself and show you who I think you are with my eyes, which is always different. Because like I said, people get beaten up in society, and then the body image stuff comes through girls, and whether you're in that industry or everyday life, you kind of see it. So I always tell people, if you remember when you were 2, 3, and 4, you see yourself in the mirror, you go running up, give yourself a big old kiss and smile at yourself. I'm like, that's who I want you to remember when I'm taking your photo. So I'm the mirror.
Is that natural for you to go there?
It is, yeah.
Like that's in you.
That's in me. That's what I want. And so it's never anything I practiced. It's never anything. And, like I said, and, when you're shooting film, the energy's up. Digital created something I had no idea. And it was the preview.
Right.
So I'd be working with a bride or groom or a model, and I'd shoot and I'd look and I'd be like, oh, look at that. And then they'd be like, oh my gosh. And then you'd look at them and they'd be like, they get so excited and just filled with a different energy. And then they believe that they're beautiful. And when they believe it, they become it.
And then everything comes alive?
Everything comes alive.
Like your job gets easier because...
Yeah, like they feed off of me and then I feed off of them. I remember I took another shooter to a wedding I was shooting in New York. And I'm like in Times Square.
So Calgary couple?
Calgary couple.
In a network, referred, like how's
like... I was, they saw me shoot another friend's wedding at Baker Lake.
Okay.
Anyways, somewhere up.
Yeah, so it's the word of mouth.
Yeah.
Random, like do good work and it just
90% of it.
Okay.
I've had people book me without even seeing the images because they're just like, I just want your personality at our wedding because I know you're going to get along with everybody and I know you're going to help everybody along the way.
Yep.
So that's a huge part of it. So yeah, so
you go to New York.
Go to New York.
Does it freak you out a lot at all? Like at this point in your career where I got this locked down, or does it get nervous about traveling to shoot a wedding?
No, never nervous to travel to shoot a wedding, but the only thing I would be nervous about shooting for anybody is I want to make sure they have the best product possible.
Right.
Never nervous about, like, it could be a tornado, it could be a blizzard, it could be anything. And I'm like, this is perfect. We're going to get this. Is going to be awesome. This. And they'd just be like, I knew you were going to say that. And I'm like, I got you. You don't worry about that. And it always works out. So weddings, I'm never stressed going into a wedding.
Yep. Just because of the amount of experience you have now in it?
I've shot just over 600 weddings in my career now.
No way, man.
Yeah, and it's...
Does it change, though, the first dozen to the last dozen? Like, are you...
Oh, absolutely.
You're a different animal?
Not a different animal, but just more refined. Because back then, I'd be like lining up, I'd be shooting some family photos. Family photos are so superbly important, and people don't usually allot a lot of time for it. And I pack a lot of, and I'm grabbing them, I'm pushing them in, and I'm like, don't give me I just met this person at a barbecue feel. Pull them in and love them. That's what I want, because the body language is super subtle, but it really changes how that photograph is. You feel the emotion behind it rather than just it being kind of flat.
Yep.
So the first 12, you're just like, man, I just hope I do a great job. And you shoot.
I get the shot, or like.
Yeah, you get a couple of hero shots, and then you kind of the family photos, and then you kind of realize, oh, you know what? I didn't shoot the bride with the maid of honor, whatever it was, because it's not on your radar. And then eventually you just kind of go, okay, now I've got a formula started. But there was a guy named Doug McRae who was an incredible film photographer, unbelievable. And he was kind of the wedding world guy. Local here.
And everyone knew him as
everybody knew
that guy?
Everybody knew Doug was his personality, again, larger than life and just supremely confident. And then digital came in and it just exploded for his world. He's like, I don't like it. And he didn't respond well to it. So he just bowed out.
What do you think that transition was? Do you think it was like the old guard that felt nervous or slighted because now everyone could pick up a digital camera and eventually get the right shot because of the preview?
Yeah.
Was that the...
I think that's part of it. And I think everybody who grew up shooting film, you get introduced to, a lot of talent, and you're just wondering how it got there.
Yep.
So you see these guys and girls and they, they're shooting, and then it's like that, shooting and that, shooting and that, shooting that. And I'm like, and as a seasoned photographer, you kind of do that once in a while too, and you're like, okay, my exposure is bang on, but then you forget about it because this relationship is so much more important than that.
Yep.
And so there's a show back in Toronto called Naked in the House. They'd have 12 photographers shoot one nude model in one location, and you had half an hour, and you had 12 frames, medium format, no preview. You had a light meter, very few props, and you had 12 perspectives coming in to the same subjectivity in the same location. And what a magical show that was. Super, super cool.
I can't, it sounds unbelievable.
Unbelievable. And so I actually
displayed
so
everything?
they would choose their top 3.
Okay.
And then they would have a show anonymously, and then they would all vote. The photographers would vote and say, this is the best in the series. And it was so good. And a great exercise for people to don't rely on stuff. So there was a really incredible husband-wife couple that were shooting weddings, and they were just taken off. Their wave was like a tsunami. It was unbelievable, super talented. And I asked him once, and I'm like, what happens when your preview dies? And he was like, I'd be dead.
No way.
And I'm like, okay. And that was a good lesson to me. You're like, okay, everybody gets to where they are, and it doesn't necessarily matter how they get there.
Yep.
So to be slighted about somebody who grew up shooting digital and looking at the preview and stuff, the end of the day, the image is phenomenal because, a really good photographer back in the film days, and Bryce Meyer's a great example of this, they knew the darkroom. So the darkroom is where you get a great negative, but you can have a really bad print, or you get a great negative and you get an amazing print. So there was actually master printers who would print for other photographers because those photographers were only good at the one thing.
Right.
And then introduce Photoshop, and it's endless. And I got in my way so badly. I did the most brutal post-production and like terrible Photoshop and awfulness.
Just because you see the tool.
Yeah.
You have access to like this tool that can do everything. And
you play and
you overdo it.
There's a trend and you take that and then it just is like HDR.
Yeah.
Oh, what a nightmare that was. If I could rewind anything, it'd be like, let's get rid of that. Because it's unrelatable.
The HDR way back then, were you doing the three flames? The three
frames? Like bracketing?
Yeah.
No.
So it was just you take one shot and then bring it in Photoshop and then filter it.
Filter it. Terrible. So I had to really teach myself a couple of valuable things. One was I need to get out of my own way because I'd be on my computer like 20 hours a day.
On the post-production?
Post-production, yeah. Because and I was predominantly busy with weddings back then. So
how did that, sorry, I want to drag you there.
No.
When you started getting into it, what was the initial, like the first few gigs? Fashion? And then the weddings just kind of slowly happen, and then you're like all in on weddings, or like where's the?
So the fashion came in, and it's quite funny because I started off in fashion, and I was enjoying it because I was just learning.
It was natural, right? You kind of been in the world. It felt
right.
Yep.
Felt like okay, this is a good fit, and there's a long road ahead because the fashion world of being like premier photographers is and especially if you leave Calgary. Calgary's got a market, but it's not a big market. And so New York, LA, Europe, and the competition is fierce and like the talent is off the charts. And again, being a super duper family guy. So started in the fashion, and then fashion for a while went in a really gross direction for me. I didn't like it. You got Giselle Bundchen like with her arm under her leg, pointing a video camera at her crotch. And I'm like, what in the hell is that? What is that doing? What's the message?
Yep.
So I kind of was like, and I wasn't like looking down my nose at it. I was like, that's just not anything I want to do. I was more kind of like always thought I'd love to pursue the Ralph Lauren like romantic campaigns, beautiful like 1600 grain film and stuff like that. That's what I was like. That's where I fit, and I love those. They're timeless images. It's not a trend, and so started kind of so I shoot Lee's. And it wasn't shooting Lee's wedding. I was just giving those guys an anonymous gift kind of thing. I was like, well, I'll just shoot. And then got a couple other people to ask me to shoot their weddings. And then I was like, I'm going to do a trade show. And
down like Big Four or wherever?
Yeah, BMO.
Okay.
Yeah. Like Cajun and Wild Animal. Sitting there, and I just felt like, I felt dirty.
Yeah, it just didn't feel...
Hated it.
And you knew right away?
Knew right away I didn't like that process. Came in and I had, 5x7s displayed, Mickey Mouse kind of trade show booth. And a couple other photographers came by and they're like, your rates are not where they should be because you're good and you're going to pull our rates down.
Yeah.
And I was like, oh, okay. So I doubled my rates, and I told my ex-wife at the time, I was like, I don't think I'm ever going to book another wedding because my rates are too high.
Yeah.
And then I got like 5 times busier than I was the year before.
And just word of mouth?
Word of mouth.
And how long did it take to get to that spot? Years?
It was a couple of years. Like, so the first few years, you're just kind of like maybe shooting 5.
Yep.
And
you're just patient with it? You're just like...
Well, I didn't have because I was always doing all these other things, and I was like, I didn't laser focus myself the way some people do, because I was like, I still loved building stuff.
Yep.
I still loved the camaraderie. Nothing better than the camaraderie of working with a group of guys at a nightclub.
Yep.
It's just so fun. Like, I still bump into guys. I bumped into Jared walking out of a Home Depot, and it's like you've never skipped a beat because you're just, we all had each other's backs back then, whether we knew it or not, right? And it was just like a family. So you feel at home. It's like Cheers. Yep. The Embassy was like a really, and quite unique.
For sure.
Because the Embassy wasn't a scrappy place. It was a place where people just wanted to go and have fun. And, it started to get a little bit weird. And that's when I bowed out. Yep. I even went back for a cameo. And a big fight broke out. And I was like, a fight! And I was like, okay, I can't do this ever again. Like,
I'm out.
Yeah, my instinct's gone. So I'm gonna be doing more damage than good. So but anyway, the group of guys was great. So as far as like getting into the world, so I thought my first step was like, I'm going to do these trade shows. So I just kept on doing them, even though I hated the process because it was important, because it was networking.
Yeah.
So,
but even if it was an awkward networking, you were willing to put yourself through it.
I was like, I'm going to do this because I think that this is, as far as marketing is concerned, I'm not going to go door to door and go hand my cards out at every bridal boutique. That's not my style either, because I never chased work in that sense. I always wanted, I'm like, if we meet each other and you want to work with me, you're never going to feel 1 ounce of pressure to book Paul McGrath for anything, for a corporate shoot or for a wedding. And I would always tell, wedding couples, I'm like, I'm an investment and I'm never going to contact you unless somebody else is interested in that date, because I want you to make a good, solid decision based on your gut and how you feel, rather than lack of availability or pressure. Because who likes to make any decisions in that scenario. So I was always super chill, and people are just like, I think what it did is let their guard down and go, this guy doesn't want to, I'm not a sale. I'm just like, he wants to work with us, but he wants us to work with him too. So it was a great relationship in that sense. And then people are like, Paul's just going to take good care of you. He's going to go to every length possible to make sure you get a great product at the end of whatever it is. And that was kind of the driving force behind all of my referrals, which is probably 90% of my business was just referral based.
Is it uncomfortable that's the, that is the driver for the business? Does it feel like it can be because you're not in control of it, but it's the best way to get business?
100%.
But and I'm asking you as building my business, that's kind of based on referrals, right? It's
So what you do, like for me, I go through those wedding fairs, and I was like, all I'm really looking for here is to open up 6 to 10 new circles that they might not know who I am. And so that's why I went through the process, because I thought, because you work through your own network, and it was really funny because I looked back at my network and I'm like, man, I know so many different walks of life in Calgary, but there's more people to be, in front of. So part of my philosophy was, I need to get out of my way because I'm really bad at post-production, and it's 20 hours a day and it's not my favorite. So I hired an editor. So she did all my weddings, all my family stuff, and I kept doing like my corporate work, Alberta Ballet. And then I started looking at her work, and we worked together, kind of go, this is what I'm looking for. And man, she was good, fast, delivered a great product. So I got out of that part of my way of my business because she was better, because then I could do more of this.
How long did it take you to get there, to understand that you needed to hire help to kind of scale, to allow you to scale and do what you're good at?
It was my ex-wife going, are you going to be joining us for dinner tonight or not?
Like 2 or 3 years into this?
About that,
Okay. And then you realize that
when
you're in the way.
Yeah. So when you're shooting 2 to 3 weddings a weekend, because I went from shooting 5 a year to shooting 35 a year.
Just doing good work and
people are just like delivering and just kind of like always. And, and back then I didn't have a rock solid contract. So my contract developed over time. And I think what the best thing about me going to the wedding fairs and all that was networking, not with clients all the time, networking with the other people in the industry. And I remember one friend of mine said, we're co-opetition. So a lot of times you're competing with these people, but we're all friends. So there's one guy in particular, Schramm, super, super passionate Hungarian guy. I just love that guy. He's done a lot of portraits for me personally as well, but he shot my favorite shots that I have of my 2 kids and myself, my 3 kids. And he and I would bounce work off each other. I'd be like, you know what, I'm booked, but you go to Andrzej and he's going to take the same care that I'm going to take care of you. And I know he's passionate about it and he loves it. So it became more of a business thing, like networking within the industry. And then you get referrals that way too. And that was very much the same as working in the fashion industry. And they're like, oh, this guy's hanging up clothes. So that stylist is like, oh, like he cares about what I'm doing too. He's a team player. So the next time she's talking to an art director, she's like, Paul was really helpful on set and did a great job. So hire him. And that's how I think a lot of business works, is just like being a good guy, being a good girl, and just trying to help everybody along the way and not having an ego about what your role is in a collective project. Because for me, if I don't have a stylist on board, the clothes, I'm like, oh, okay, I got to try to come up with something to hide the clothes if they're not working or if the makeup not there. So you hire a team of people, and I have a couple of teams in the wedding world, and I have a couple of teams in the corporate world that I love working with, because I don't ever have to focus on anything other than pulling the trigger and working on that relationship. And then my clients see that and they're like, wow, these guys are like rock solid.
And then it just goes because the work you're delivering is at such a good level that just the machine gets going.
Yeah. So when I was introduced from that wedding in Hawaii, girl brings me to the ballet, and I go, the first thing I said,
like read my mind. I'm like, I want to hear the ballet story.
Well, what happened was, first thing I said was, I go, I know there's another photographer who works for the ballet, so tell me that story, because I'm not here to poach anybody's client. And they're like, no, he's just done, doesn't want to do it anymore. And I was like, okay, sure. So they're like, what are you going to charge us? And I was like, $0, because I have no idea if I can deliver what you guys are looking for. And the deeper I got into the ballet world, oh man, it was painful.
Painful learning curve?
Learning curve, because I'm shooting an image and I know technically things are working and I know the image, and I'm like, man, and I'd show them, I go, look at that. And they'd be like, don't ever show the dancer that, ever. That's terrible. And I'd be like, what? And so I was like, okay, wait, let me just catch my breath for a second here. And they go, it's not your photography, it's the dancer's pose. It's their foot or it's their hand. Just, and we're talking I'm talking a 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch.
Crazy, man.
The margin is unbelievably unforgiving. And they're painful perfectionists, those dancers. Like, they dedicate and work so hard, and just, they love their craft like I've never seen anybody. You need to get a dancer in here because they're incredible, and I've got a couple for you.
Perfect.
But anyway, so as I started building that relationship up, for some reason, it's kind of like the weirdest thing, and it'll sound corny, Matt Damon and Good Will Hunting, they're like, how's this? And he's like, I can just play. I don't know why, but with math, I can just play. And with dance, it was just one of those things. Once I figured out that margin of error was so tight, something clicked in me, and there's 32 dancers. And they're all different. They all have a different way to get to the same spot. So just through learning that relationship with them, I knew how to play with them intimately. And they'd be like, oh, okay, this, Paul's here. And they would also get lifted up, because I'd bring them Crave cupcakes, because they're killing like 5,000 calories a day and they need a little bit of a lift. My daughter would come in, my son would come in, and they were just a family. And they actually, when I first got introduced by Blair Puente to the ballet, he goes, you guys, Paul is part of the family. And that's how he introduced me. And those dancers just took me in. And so did Jean-Grand Maître, who's the artistic director. And they just started to trust my process with him. Yep. And was that fun. Because the magic, the subjectivity is...
I've seen a bunch of your... and that, like, every time I saw it, I was like, holy shit. Like,
yeah. Well, and for me, because, and this is, I think, what... circling a little bit back to the digital world, where it's the spray and pray. Yep. And you hope that one image works. I would go, and Jean-Grand Maître, the head girl at the school, Ashley McNeil, they're like, man, your timing is good. And I couldn't tell you exactly why, but it just happened to work. And I started shooting all the dancers' weddings, and that was my gift to them. I'm like, I'm not charging you guys. You guys need a gift, because they don't get paid any money. Right. They're classic artists who just do what they do because they love it, and they don't get paid necessarily a huge amount of money to do it. But and you just fall in love with them. You really do. And
that world, like, when are you shooting like the performances? Like, what other, like, do they dance Fridays, like Thursday, Friday, Saturdays, and you're there 3 days a week, like every night, or how's it look?
So I would go in, do the studio stuff, like watch them rehearse and shoot some stuff there, because that's part of the behind the scenes that people, unknowingly love almost more than the actual production. They love the process.
Were you getting your bearings then too, to understand what was going to happen on the night?
Absolutely. Okay. Because there's Don Quixote was like this biggest set you've ever seen and staged, and you're like, wow, like you have so much to cover, so you need to go in knowing. So you have to do your homework. So part of that homework for me was going in and shooting the rehearsal. And I'd talk to Jean and say, okay, what am I looking for here? And he'd tell me. And then the dancers would tell me too. They'd be like, oh, there's this really cool part, and this is what's going to happen. Yep. So as you're shooting, I mean, like, there's no pause and redo it. You just go and do your best. And I would go from the studio. Then I would go to what they call their dress rehearsal at the Jubilee, shoot that, because you can't shoot an actual show, because I'm like click, 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 and everybody around me would want. So they would like literally block off the entire center part of the Jubilee so I could go wherever I wanted. And so the first show I was like including the orchestra and like shoot, and they're like, oh, I think he's too artistic for us. And then they saw a couple other images that I honed in on, and they're like, wow, he gets it. And not only did I get it, I loved working with him, and I loved the dancers, and we just...
What was it? Like when you say that, I could like believe you. What is it that like...
They just give it everything they've got. They leave everything on the stage every time. They dance through torn muscles. They dance through like, and obviously they're the artistic guys are like, take care of yourselves. Jean was awesome. I remember him looking at a couple of the boys, and he's like, what are you eating? And they're like, steak. And he goes, put blue cheese on it. Because he's like, you're getting too skinny. And that's, I've always loved that about him, because he cares for those dancers. And he's like, these guys will go to any lengths to make magic and make our world a more beautiful place. And then you see them, and so you see them on stage, and they're poised and doing their thing. And then they go off stage gracefully, and they collapse. And they're just like, and you just can't help but to fall in love with them, because they love it. And their dedication and passion is super inspiring to me. So we played so well together when I would capture, because I would shoot all their advertising as well. So part of going back to, what are you going to charge us? And I was like a big fat zero. And then I started shooting their productions, and I was like, the ballet is not a business that makes an enormous amount of money. So I'm going to shoot these productions as a sponsor. So I'll just shoot all the shows that you'd see at the Jubilee, no charge.
Gotcha.
Because I just wanted to contribute somehow. And then they started getting me to shoot all their marketing material. So Alison Geskin was the head of marketing at that point. And I remember looking at her, and I go, do you have me here because I'm free, or do you have me here because you love what I do? She goes, we love what you do. And I said, okay, well then we got to talk, because now I can't do this anymore, because it's detrimental to the overall industry. You can't do that. And so I gave them a day rate that I thought was reasonable. They thought it was fair, and so we started playing. So then, so the shows, I'll still shoot some of the shows au gratis, because I'm like, I still want to sponsor them. I always had kind of had the idea that I wanted to be on the board of Alberta Ballet kind of towards the end.
Because the experience was just amazing?
Yeah, it's changed me forever.
Isn't it wild, though, to actually think about that? Like when you first started getting into all this, that all of a sudden the ballet would just be the thing that...
Yeah, that was the thing that, so people always ask, they're like, are you a wedding photographer? Or what do you do? And I'm like, and there was always a huge stigma not wanting to be called a wedding photographer, because nobody in the corporate world would take you seriously. And I started kind of going, that's bullshit, because all of the corporate clients I got from the wedding world for the most part, lots of them. And, then the referrals and all that stuff. But I tell people, I specialize in people. I specialize in bringing the best out in them. And that's my job. So it's not weddings. It's not the ballet. It's not corporate stuff. It's not families. It's all together. And it's, and I do some fine artwork as well. I've actually got an installation in New York in a boutique hotel that they've got 22 pieces in their rooms. Magical. And it is a dancer in a New York subway, and the subway's just ripping past her, and she's just like poised. And I'll never forget that, because I shot from that perspective, and then I went in line with her. I said, okay, I want to try to shoot this when the train's coming parallel beside me too. And I was like, whoa. And she was just like, poof. Like they're athletes, like through and through.
In that shoot specifically, is it, I guess you can't book the spot. Are you shooting in a live environment?
Running and gunning, man.
Crazy.
Running and gunning. Crazy. Because they're like, you need a permit in New York. And I'm like, no, you don't. Like, yeah, you do, but no, you don't. Technically, I just shot a wedding in Canmore. I got like a 3-day permit that I only needed like 6 hours for, just contributing to, let's play fair in the sandbox kind of thing. Big issue when you are traveling through international waters and stuff like that. Technically, you should have all these permits in place. How do you do it? And the States was particularly hard for a while. I went in, I was shooting a wedding, and then I had talked to one of the dancers at the ballet, and I'm like, do you know any dancers in New York? I want to play. He's like, yeah, I know a few. And so they reached out to me, and I shot a couple of them, and I was like, that was, I'd spent half an hour with them, but I mean,
I can't
people
imagine.
around. It's New York. Like nobody cares.
Yeah.
You know, that's where you kind of think, well, what I'm doing to them is not as important to them as it is to me, right?
Yeah,
But
yeah.
the end product was serendipitous because I had the vision. I knew what I wanted. I felt I executed it well. And then a design company saw the image and they're like, we want this in a hotel. And I was like, stellar. I don't know what that means, but yeah,
Sounds
I'm
great.
in, right? And
Crazy.
yeah,
Is it where you are today in, early 20s? Could you have ever seen this was your path and this is kind of the
no way, man. Like I said, rugby player, like no real idea of, so that's why I always call it a happy accident. Like it fell into me.
but weird though, right? Because it's like it fell, but there's still some connection pieces there too, right? Like there's a
Yeah. Like once I think they call it the Hedgehog Principle, where it's like, find what you love to do, find out how you can get paid to what you love to do. And I think part of what I did was every year I gifted one free wedding. And when I, like said, dealing with the dancers at the ballet, I would typically shoot those for, if not free, a very reduced cost, because I have always felt I didn't train for this. Right. I didn't go to school. I have been given something that I've nurtured, but it just fell into my lap. And so I felt obligated. I'm like, I need to gift back a little bit. Once a year, once in a while. I do a lot of different shoots some are heavily emotional, and you just kind of go, okay, I just got to do the best I can for these people because they're in a bad spot. And it's, shooting a funeral or shooting like a brain injured child or whatever it is. And you're just like, they're trusting me to take care of them. And that's another huge honor in any sense, no matter what you're shooting. It's like they believe that I'm going to take care of them, and I'm going to do my best for that. So yeah, I don't know the answer of how it all happened, other than just kind of getting gentle nudges along the way. And then you do hear from, feedback from people, and they're like, yeah, like Chad Johnston, who I mentioned earlier. I told him I was going to go to school. I'm like, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to go to ACAD and figure this stuff out. And he's like, don't do it.
And why were you thinking that? Just because you felt like school is going to give you a foundation that you needed to be creditable?
No, the technical. I felt like this is going to really teach me that. It's going to introduce me to some other artists, because I think a huge part of the way that an artist gets better, if I just speak to photography, to be a great photographer, you need to know how the darkroom works. And then you'll become a better photographer, even if you're not doing the developing, because you'll know what they need to help them get what they want. And then, digital, same thing. If you can figure that out. But if you talk to different photographers, and I used to meet with a group of guys, we called ourselves market grade. And there was graphic designers, there was writers, there was architects, there was me, who was like photography and a bit of art. And we would just think tank. We just talk about stuff, and what's the best way to, pursue something. And although the only tidbit of wisdom I had in those think tanks that I remember saying was, I'm like, you guys, we need to get in the way. If we're not in the way, nobody knows you're there. So you got to get in the way, and your clients will help that part too. But for us, because we all had our own independent businesses going that had been like 10 years in, and we're like, are we going to do this? And I was like, oh man, you guys, like, if we do, we have to be all in 1,000% and get in the way. And sometimes getting in the way was getting out of our own way. And then we're all like, I was like, I've been doing this for 10 years and I haven't even seen where my photography is going to take me. So I wasn't ready to let it go. And a couple others were like, it's just, they had good things going. And what's funny is photography was my side hustle when I was bouncing at the embassy, doing some construction. I just get these gigs, kind of keep going and try to learn a little bit more, and then do some personal work, go out with other photographers and shoot a little bit and kind of go, okay, I like what you did there, and I'm jealous because you did it way better than I just did. Take all that, and then photography fully took off, and there was no doing anything else. Like I just couldn't do it. And then you have kids, and you're like kids spell love Time. Like that's just it. So they will never remember what you say or anything. They'll remember how you made them feel. And they always say, the most important work you ever do is within the four walls of your home, because they're who you work for. I don't work for anyone else. I work for my family.
Yep.
And knowing that, photography is taking off, then we get to 2020. And life is I knew my 2 years out. I was booking weddings 2 years ahead of time. So I knew what my 2 years almost always looked like.
Just rolling 2 years. You're just
rolling 2 years for the most part.
Yep.
And you're like, okay, this is something where I can keep the lights on. I can keep a comfort of life for my family, and we can enjoy.
Yep.
And then 2020 hits, and you're like, whoa. And you're like, okay, what do I do? So you have to pivot. And I was just lucky that I pivoted into construction again. And the guy who I worked for, I was working at the embassy, and I would work for them during the day and then go dance with Tony Banfield at the top of the stairs.
Full flex.
Oh, totally. And have, and then playing the most ridiculous games with Ladder and Bradley and all that stuff. Anyway, had super fun doing that, but I had luckily been doing that, so I had a bit of a foundation. And the guy, he had like 15 empty warehouses, and we're talking like 100,000 square foot warehouses. And he's like, what am I going to do? And then he got approached by the film industry, and they're like, we need some sound studios. So he contacted me, and he's like, I'm converting a warehouse into a film studio, and I need you for like 5 weeks. Do you think you could help me?
Yep.
Like, I just happen to have a lot of time on my hands, so yeah, I can. And there was some photography happening, but 250 person weddings were going down to like 20, 10 elopements. Alberta Ballet shut their doors because they couldn't compromise having somebody come in and get any of the one dancers sick, because then they have no product. So I'm like, okay, I'm not shooting a ton, so I'll do this. And it was working for, like they were doing the sound studios for HBO for The Last of Us. And Rocky Mountain Film Studios, and they've just been going ever since, and they've converted a lot of those warehouses. Now they're doing purpose-built studios that are like 100,000 square feet, clear span, not a column in the way. And so I've been helping them for about a year, just a year and a half kind of thing, and keeping the lights on. And now photography's starting to pick up again. So
just the world's kind of, people can now plan again.
Yeah. Like they're, these poor couples, referring to the wedding world, like they're planning their wedding 6 different times.
Yeah, for sure.
And they're exhausted, and it's just like not a lot of fun. Corporate shoot, same thing. They're like, yeah, we can do it. And then the restrictions kick in. They're like, oh, we can't have anybody who's not part of the business in, or the entire office got cleared and we're all working from home. So you're just
hanging on,
making it work. And just kind of morphing. And then again, you just lean in. Like I assisted a guy named CJ Burton, who's probably the best photo illustrator I've ever seen in my life. He based in Calgary, the quirkiest kind of little, playing guitar, and just, he's just classic, but and humble. And he'd have like probably a dozen Time magazine covers.
No way.
Just like incredible work. And he referred a couple of clients to me, and that introduces you to other people, because he's like, I can't get there to do the work anyway, and Paul, take good care of you.
Done.
So being helpful and helping other people in the industry always opens up something. You don't do it for that reason, you just do it to be helpful. But
is there any areas that you want to get into on the photography side, like sport, or is there anything that's...
The dream was always National Geographic.
No way.
Yeah. And I think it was partly because Mom was the anthropologist, and I just grew up watching like Mutual of Omaha, like
those were
Wild
awesome
Kingdom. Love that stuff, man. And I shot it wasn't a wedding. I was working as the model, and I was in India, and I was like, I want to go down, and I want to be like on the ground, laying down, and I want Cobra like striking my camera lens. And I think people saw that, and they're like, well, we can't let this guy do this. But that was always one of the biggest things, is like, this is what I want to do, is I want to shoot for National Geographic. And Africa is probably one of my favorite continents, and I would go back there. Will it happen? Will you go like spend a chunk of time there and shoot like wildlife for? I will, once my kids are at an age where they can join me for a little bit, and then they can get on a plane and fly home themselves. And my girlfriend, and she's a graphic designer, she can work anywhere in the world. So I think that as soon as that happens, I'll pursue that. But I mean, to actually shoot at National Geographic's caliber is that's a different stratosphere of background and commitment. Like, you're on the safari for 6 months trying to find what you're looking for, right? And then shoot it on top of that. So,
it's cool, man. from knowing you back then, and I was like like we touched on earlier, the creativity piece. There wasn't a lot of opportunities back then to be a creative person.
No.
It was always like wasn't frowned upon. It just there wasn't a lot of opportunities. But to find it and to run with it for this long is.
I've been lucky, and
the way you explain it, it makes sense. Like the happy.
Yeah, happy accident. And it was just it's a calling that you're like it. I didn't look for it; it just came to me, and I'm just super grateful that I got exposed to it.
Yeah.
Had I gone into broadcasting and not got back into the fashion world, who knows what I would be doing? I might not know you. I might not know a lot of my best friends.
Yep.
You just don't know the circle that you're going to run into then. So, yeah.
Cool, man. We've been talking for a while. I'd probably surprise you, so we should put a bow on this sucker.
Done deal, man.
The only question I ask is when I say Calgary, where does your head go?
Home. It's my home. It's where my family is. It's where my friends who are my, extension of my family. And I love it here. We're in a really unique, beautiful part of the world, and I just love it. Yeah.
That's the home piece that's it. That's like I feel the same way. It's just a simple word that describes everything this place is.
Exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Thanks for taking the time. This was really cool.
All right, brother. Anytime.
Talk soon.
For sure.
Thanks.
Good.